On September 18, 2025, the Moscow-Minsk rail corridor fell eerily silent. What was once a bustling artery of commerce, humming with the constant movement of goods and people, suddenly became a place of stillness and uncertainty. The familiar rumble of trains was replaced by an uneasy quiet that stretched for miles. Hundreds of freight trains, including fuel tankers, ground to a halt, victims not of accident but of a sudden border closure. Locomotives sat idle, their cargoes of fuel, machinery and raw materials stranded in the middle of nowhere, as crews waited for news that never came. The stoppage sent shockwaves from China's factories to Europe's markets. Supply chains that had been carefully calibrated over years were thrown into chaos in a matter of hours, leaving manufacturers scrambling for alternatives and traders watching nervously as delays mounted. Gasoline and diesel supplies to Belarus and Western Russia were cut off instantly. Fuel depots emptied quickly, and the flow of energy that powered entire regions was abruptly severed, leaving communities vulnerable. Panic spread as gas stations in cities like Smolensk and Vitebsk ran dry, with lines of anxious drivers stretching for blocks. People rushed to fill their tanks, fearing the uncertainty of tomorrow, while tempers flared and rumors of rationing began to circulate. The railway, once a symbol of global trade, had become a choke point overnight. What had been a seamless link between continents was now a glaring vulnerability, exposing just how fragile the system truly was. The closure was triggered by political tensions, not technical failures. It was a decision made in government offices, not control rooms, and its effects rippled far beyond the border itself. Poland, citing security threats, sealed its border with Belarus, disrupting a vital trade artery. The move was swift and uncompromising, leaving little time for businesses or governments to react. The move was a response to military exercises, drone incursions, and a migrant crisis at the frontier. Tensions had been simmering for weeks, but few expected such a dramatic escalation, one that would impact millions. The stranded trains became the first casualties in a larger geopolitical standoff. Their cargoes, once destined for distant cities, now sat exposed to the elements, silent witnesses to a conflict that was as much about power as it was about policy. The world was reminded how quickly interconnectedness can unravel. In a single day, the ties that bound nations together could be severed, leaving uncertainty in their wake. The economic engine linking East and West had been switched off, leaving ordinary people and businesses in limbo. Shopkeepers, truck drivers, and factory workers all felt the impact. As livelihoods hung in the balance and questions about the future grew louder, the silent tracks told a story of a region and a world on edge. In the hush that followed, everyone wondered, how long would the silence last, and what would it take to restore the rhythm of the rails? Poland's decision to close its border was not made overnight. It was the culmination of years of rising tensions, mounting pressure, and immediate security threats that had been building along its eastern frontier. For months, Polish officials had warned of growing instability, and the situation finally reached a breaking point. The Zapad 2025 military exercises, conducted jointly by Russia and Belarus just kilometers from Poland's border, were widely interpreted as a provocative show of force. These drills involved thousands of troops, heavy weaponry, and simulated attacks, sending a clear message to Warsaw and its NATO allies. At the same time, drone incursions into Polish airspace became increasingly frequent, raising alarms about surveillance and possible sabotage. Alongside this, a sudden spike in engineered migrant crossings, believed to be orchestrated by Belarus, fueled Warsaw's fears of hybrid warfare. In just 1 week, Polish authorities recorded nearly 700 attempted border crossings, a dramatic increase that overwhelmed border patrols and heightened a sense of crisis. In response, Poland took the drastic step of shutting all major road and rail links with Belarus. This included key trade routes that connected not only Poland, but the entire European Union to the east. The message from Warsaw was unmistakable. Security would now trump economic interests, no matter the cost. Polish leaders emphasized that the safety of their citizens and the sovereignty of their borders were non-negotiable. The closure severed the main land bridge for China-EU trade, putting billions of dollars in commerce at risk and causing immediate disruptions for businesses and transport companies across the continent. It was a calculated gamble by Poland, one that aimed to force Minsk and Moscow to de-escalate, while also drawing global attention to the escalating crisis on Europe's doorstep. The border had now become a front line in a new kind of European conflict, where military maneuvers, migration, and information warfare all intersected, reshaping the security landscape of the region. The border closure's impact was immediate. Fuel shortages hit Belarus almost overnight, sending shockwaves through daily life. In western Russia, the situation was no different. Within days, long lines formed at gas stations, and tempers flared as supplies dwindled. Gas stations ran dry, public transport stalled, and businesses ground to a halt. Commuters found themselves stranded, unable to get to work or school. Delivery trucks couldn't move, store shelves emptied, and farmers faced ruined harvests as machinery sat idle in the fields, waiting for fuel that never arrived. The economic ripple was swift and severe, exposing the region's dependence on uninterrupted energy supplies. Factories paused production and workers faced sudden layoffs. Beyond fuel, the closure stranded hundreds of trains carrying goods between China and the EU, leaving vital cargo stuck at border crossings. The new Silk Road's main artery was blocked, halting trade worth over 25 billion euros a year. Warehouses filled up as goods piled high, unable to move forward. Companies relying on rail freight faced costly delays and production threats. Some had to suspend operations while others scrambled to find alternative routes. Rerouting was slow and expensive. Alternatives were limited. Road transport couldn't handle the volume, and air freight was prohibitively costly for most goods. The crisis revealed the fragility of global supply chains and the high cost of geopolitical instability. Even the most efficient logistics networks can unravel in days. For many, it was a wake-up call. Efficiency means little without resilience. Businesses began to rethink their strategies, questioning just-in-time models. The week-long blockage forced a scramble for solutions, but none came easily. Emergency meetings were held, but the damage was already done. The lesson was clear. Trade routes are only as strong as the politics that protect them. In a world so interconnected, a single border can bring everything to a standstill. The blockade threatened China's Belt and Road Initiative, severing its prized Eurasian rail corridor. Beijing's response was swift and pragmatic. Diplomacy, not confrontation. Chinese officials opened urgent talks with Poland, leveraging the immense value of China-EU trade. They pressured both Warsaw and Minsk, reminding them of the economic stakes. For Belarus, the message was clear. Provocations risked a vital partnership with China. Within a week, Poland reopened the border, citing de-escalation. But China's intervention was decisive. Beijing had protected its trade interests without taking sides in the regional dispute. The episode showcased China's growing power, not through force, but through economic leverage. On the new Silk Road, commerce was king. Belarus's crisis can't be separated from its alliances. Isolated by the West, Belarus has grown deeply dependent on Russia for economic and military support. The country is now a key strategic asset for Moscow, hosting Russian troops and even tactical nuclear weapons. Yet Belarus has also courted China, seeking to balance its reliance on Russia. China is now Belarus's second-largest trading partner, with exports to China surging in recent years. Membership in organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS signals Minsk's pivot eastward. The September crisis exposed the tension in this strategy: military loyalty to Moscow, but economic salvation from Beijing. Belarus's future, it seems, is increasingly tied to the east. For ordinary people, the border closure brought hardship and anxiety. Gasoline shortages turned daily routines into ordeals. Families worried about work, school, and emergencies. Small businesses and farmers suffered as deliveries stopped and crops risked spoiling. The crisis deepened a sense of isolation in Belarus, already under authoritarian rule and international sanctions. Political repression and economic pain combined to make daily life precarious. Truck drivers and train crews stranded at the border endured days in limbo, rationing food and waiting for news. Their stories highlight the real cost of geopolitical gamesmanship. The crisis was not just a headline, it was a direct threat to livelihoods and communities. In the end, it was ordinary people who paid the highest price. The Zapad 2025 exercises were more than drills. They were a show of force on NATO's doorstep. Russia's deployment of troops and tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus erased old buffers, alarming Poland and its neighbors. Drone incursions and military posturing raised the risk of miscalculation and escalation. Poland's border closure was a defensive move, using economic leverage to counter military threats. The standoff revealed a new kind of conflict, where trade routes are as strategic as territory. Economic tools became weapons and blockades replaced bullets. The crisis showed that in modern geopolitics, commerce and security are inseparable. The front lines of conflict now run along railways and supply chains. The Belarus railway crisis exposed the fragility of global interconnectedness. One political decision severed a trade artery, disrupting millions of lives and businesses. The event forced nations to rethink the risks in their supply chains. Resilience matters as much as efficiency. For Europe, it was a wake-up call about hybrid threats and the need for security and energy independence. For China, it was a test of its Belt and Road diplomacy and a lesson in the power of economic mediation. Most of all, the crisis reminded the world that geopolitical conflicts have real human consequences. Peace and stability are the true engines of prosperity. Dialogue and cooperation are not luxuries, they are necessities in an uncertain world.